So I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the last in the Fort series. Today we're going to do Fort Concho. And I didn't know this one existed, so I'm excited. I will be muting everybody, and then after the presentation is over, we will take questions and everything. If you have any questions during and you want to ask so you don't forget, just type it up in the chat box and we'll get to it then. I did want to let everybody know, I know some people are having trouble registering for classes. If you are having any problems registering for classes or paying for them, please give one of us a call. We can do it over the phone, no problem, and we'd be glad to help you. So with all that, all my little announcements out of the way, I'll turn it over. I'll turn it over. What? Yes.
I was supposed to take a class last week, but I never got the Zoom notice. Can I have that money on that class go to another class?
Sure, I can do that, no problem. All right, I'm going to mute everybody but John.
And don't mute me, that wouldn't be good.
Okay, John, you're going to have to unmute yourself. It just says.
You get that.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, it was doing weird stuff again. All right, good to see everybody again at our final little talk on Fort Concho today. I've really enjoyed this over the last few weeks. It's been really enjoyable for me, and I hope to do something again in the spring. I don't know what yet. I'll figure that out in the next week or two. But I've really enjoyed this. I was telling Misha before we got started today, I really hope this whole COVID mess passes soon, and maybe someday we can do this in person again. I'm about zoomed out on a lot of things. I think a lot of people are getting kind of tired of the Zoom world that we live in now. But hopefully someday, and it will come, we'll do this in person. So I've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it as well, and maybe learned something along the way. All right, today we are going to talk about Fort Concho down in San Angelo. Now, San Angelo is a place where I spend a lot of time when I can, because I write a lot about the Texas sheep and goat and wool and mohair industry. And most of y'all know that San Angelo is the sheep capital of the world. It was the major wool and mohair, sheep and goat trading center in the entire world at one time, and that still plays a huge role in the culture and character of the city. When you go to San Angelo and you go down on Concho Street, you go in some of the other parts of town, you see those big ceramic sheep on the corners. That's a nod to the heritage of the sheep and goat industry in San Angelo. But San Angelo is also home to Fort Concho, which will be our final stop in our quick tour over the last week or two of these frontier forts in our area. And again, I hope you've learned something you didn't know. Fort Concho is a little different. Today, it's right smack dab in the middle of downtown San Angelo, more or less. And it always had a settlement relatively close to it, so it is a little bit different from Fort Chadbourne and Fort Phantom as well. So Fort Concho is our topic today. I did have some pictures that we took when Fred Bailey and I went down there back in June. I'm still having trouble with PowerPoints in my laptop and Zoom. I don't know what's going on there. I'm going to get a hold of somebody and figure that out, because it's making my other classes a little difficult as well. But again, we'll just kind of wing it and be flexible as we always are. All right, so San Angelo and Fort Concho. Cattlemen and sheepmen began to push their herds into the upper Concho Valley region in the 1860s, much to the distaste of the Comanche. Fort Chadbourne offered some protection, but the installation's location and lack of a stable water supply proved problematic. In November 1867, the Army selected a site at the junction of the North, Middle, and South Concho rivers where they also meet Dove Creek and Spring Creek, which became Camp Hatch, a replacement for Fort Chadbourne. Camp Hatch was named for Major John P. Hatch of the 4th Cavalry, who respectfully declined the honor. So the Army renamed the installation Camp Kelly for another member of the 4th Cavalry who had recently passed away. In 1868, the post was finally renamed Fort Concho. Fort Concho would remain in operation for the next 21 years. Fort Concho served as the headquarters for the 4th and 10th Cavalry, the 11th and 16th Infantry, and at various times the 3rd, 8th, and 9th Cavalry, and the 17th, 19th, 24th, and 25th Infantry. That's a mouthful. The post had a stable water supply and adequate grazing for livestock and horses, which made it superior to Fort Chadbourne. German stonemasons from Fredericksburg, with the assistance of the soldiers, built 39 stone structures at Fort Concho, many of which have been restored today. In the early years of Fort Concho, the Army did not engage in organized campaigns against the Comanche in the region. Instead, the soldiers provided protection for stagecoaches, cattle and sheep drives, and settlers who were moving into or through the area. There we go. This changed by the 1870s as tensions between the settlers, the Army, and the Comanche intensified with the arrival of one of Fort Concho's most important commanders, the famous or infamous Ranald Mackenzie. And maybe before we talk about Mackenzie a little bit, it might be important to talk about some of the background leading to Mackenzie's arrival at Fort Concho and his importance in the Plains Wars in Texas. The election of Ulysses Grant to the presidency in 1868 marked a significant turning point in federal Native American policy. Initially, Grant faced a dilemma regarding his policy towards the Indians. He could pursue a peace policy, the pike, or he could unleash the military upon the Native Americans, the rifle. Again, to the surprise of many, Grant chose the pike with the implementation of the Quaker peace policy. Under this policy, Grant placed the peaceful, nonviolent Quakers in charge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Although the Quakers did pursue a somewhat kinder, gentler approach, their nonviolent stance left them ineffective in controlling more radical Native American leaders. As the Quaker peace policy failed, Grant will shift to the rifle as the U.S. Army unleashed a brutal policy of total war against the Comanche and the Kiowa on the Southern Plains. Despite the Quakers' best efforts, Comanche and Kiowa raiders continued to mercilessly attack northern Texas. One rather routine Kiowa raid, known as the Salt Creek Massacre in 1871, will lead to a significant shift in federal Indian policy. At Salt Creek, a group of Kiowa warriors under the leadership of Santana and Big Tree gathered along the rail-traveled Salt Creek Road, that's in Young County, where from a hidden position, they observed a small Army convoy moving along the Salt Creek Road. This convoy was an inspection tour, which was led by General Randolph Marcy and, more importantly, General William Tecumseh Sherman. Kiowa allowed the convoy to pass, but later attacked a wagon train along the same road. News of the Salt Creek Massacre soon reached Fort Richardson and Generals Marcy and Sherman as well, who realized they could have just as easily been killed. The generals reported to President Grant the Kiowa and Comanche were out of control. The Texas frontier needed strong military action. Grant would reluctantly agree and send Ranald Mackenzie to the Texas frontier. Ranald Mackenzie, who Grant considered to be the most promising young officer at the end of the Civil War, commanded the 4th Cavalry against the Comanche and the Kiowa. Mackenzie led his troops into Blanco Canyon, that's in Crosby County, northeast of Lubbock, about 100 miles or so. Mackenzie led his troops in the Blanco Canyon, where he harassed a group of Comanche under the leadership of Quanah Parker. This seemingly unremarkable engagement set into motion a series of events that would, in time, lead to the closing of the Indian frontier in northwestern Texas. Following the Battle of Blanco Canyon, a medicine man, Izate, began to expand his influence among the Comanche. Historian Mike Campbell wrote of Izate, quote, "He claimed that a visit above the clouds had given him the power to bring the dead to life and to make bullets from the white man's rifles fall harmlessly to the earth." At his instigation, the Comanche held a Sundance, a new ritual to them, and in May 1874 decided to strike at buffalo hunters in the Texas Panhandle, end quote. In June 1874, a group of 700 Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne, under the leadership of Quanah Parker, with Izate in tow, attacked a group of buffalo hunters at Adobe Walls. This siege, known as the Battle of Adobe Walls, one of a couple of Battle of Adobe Walls, continued off and on over the course of the next 4 days. Izate's magic was not as powerful as the Comanche had hoped. The 50 caliber rounds from the buffalo hunters' rifles did not fall to the earth. Nonetheless, the Battle of Adobe Walls began a much larger and more significant series of events known as the Red River War of 1874-1875. In the Red River War, Mackenzie brutally crushed Native American resistance on the Southern Plains. The Red River War culminated in the Battle of Paladuro Canyon, in which Mackenzie's troops destroyed a few encampments while slaughtering some 1,400 Comanche horses. Without food or their horses, the Comanche, the lords of the Southern Plains for more than a century, were forced to surrender. Although sporadic fighting continued until spring, Quanah Parker returned to the reservation with 407 followers during June of 1875. So Randall Mackenzie's arrival at Fort Concho had significant consequences for the Plains Wars in Texas, the Red River War, and he eventually subdued the Comanche more or less in 1875. Fort Concho also played a role in the tragic story of Captain Nicholas Nolan and a detachment of Buffalo soldiers of Company A, 10th Cavalry at Fort Concho. As Paul H. Carlson, my old thesis chair at Texas Tech, as Paul H. Carlson recounts in his The Buffalo Soldier Tragedy of 1877, really good book, Carlson wrote, quote, in the year 1877, a drought ravaged West Texas. In the middle of that arid summer, a troop of buffalo hunters struck out on the Llano Estacado from Double Lake, south of modern Lubbock, pursuing a band of Comanche who had been raiding homesteads and hunting parties. A group of 22 buffalo hunters accompanied the soldiers as guides and allies. Several days later, Carlson wrote, 3 black soldiers rode into Fort Concho at modern San Angelo and reported that the men and officers of Troop A were missing and presumed dead from thirst. The Staked Plains Horror, as it was called, soon gained national attention. Most of the unit survived, but 4 men died and several others faced court-martial for desertion. Carlson stated, the buffalo hunters had ridden off on their own to find water, and the surviving soldiers had lived by drinking the blood of their dead horses and their own urine. A routine Army scout had turned into a disaster of the worst kind. African-American buffalo soldiers played a crucial role at Fort Concho at various times during the post history. As might be expected, the presence of African-American soldiers in a 19th century frontier community often led to conflict. Lost my place. Okay. In early 1881, an African-American soldier was shot by local rancher Thomas McCarthy. In response, a group of Buffalo soldiers formed a mob of about anywhere from 30 to 150 troops, depending on which story you believe. This mob marched into San Angelo, demanding justice for their wounded comrade. The group wounded, good Lord. The group wounded one man inside a local store and filled a local hotel with bullets, believing McCarthy to be inside. Eventually, the Texas Rangers arrived to put down the disturbance. Ranger Captain Brian March warned the post commander that the Rangers would kill anyone who crossed the river from Fort Concho and entered San Angelo. The Army abandoned Fort Concho in June of 1889, and restoration efforts on the former frontier post began in 1929. Today, Fort Concho is nearly completely restored. There are a few ruins on site, and it is listed as a National Historic Landmark, and this was done largely due to the efforts of the citizens of San Angelo, who spearheaded the restoration of Fort Concho. Now today, Fred and I were down there. They were closed because of the COVID mess, but we did manage to see some of the structures, and we did manage to get into a couple of structures as well. They've done an excellent work of restoring Fort Concho, located right there today in the heart of San Angelo. And San Angelo's done an excellent job of restoring several historic sites within the city limits. Once Fred and I were done with Fort Concho that day, we went over a few blocks to Concho Street and went to the Miss Hattie's Museum, which of course is the museum of the House of Ill Repute there in San Angelo. If you're ever in San Angelo and you have some time and it's open, go take that tour of Miss Hattie's. It's worth doing. It's interesting. The young lady that gave us a tour did a very excellent job. They had that thing set up very well, giving the history of that House of Ill Repute in San Angelo that was in operation all the way into the 1950s when the Texas Rangers came in and shut it down. They've done an excellent job. They've had to change the names of some of the employees at Miss Hattie's because some of the descendants of those employees still live in San Angelo, or at least their families do. So they've had to kind of disguise some identities and such. But if you do have time, go to Angelo and go to the Miss Hattie's Museum and go over by Fort Concho as well. There's a lot of stuff to look at in Angelo and around Angelo if you know where to look. All right, let's open it up to questions and comments and see what y'all have for me this time. If I don't know the answer, I'll make it up. I do that in class all the time. Anybody have any questions? I know Herb does. Misha, you want to unmute him? There he goes.
I was raised in San Angelo, born
Good.
there. So I've often gone back, but with some high school friends, we used to camp out on Spring Creek. There are two creeks out there west of San Angelo that are tributaries into the Conchos, Dove Creek and Spring Creek. And there's a county park out there on Spring Creek. And so it's a little, when my father was alive and all, we used to go camp and fish there. But there was a little town of Knickerbocker that's out just west of San Angelo. It's no longer a town, it's more of a ghost town. But there's a huge Texas highway historical sign there. And so I stopped on one of my trips to read that, and lo and behold, it says the Bays brothers were the first settlers here to start farming and irrigate out of those creeks. And they then sold their goods, their farming products, to Fort Concho. They were a main supplier of food. Well, the Bays brothers were ancestral uncles. So I didn't, you know.
Small world, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of Bayses around
Yes.
Mertzon, Texas, which is
Mhm.
further west of
Mertzon will.
San Angelo. And
Mhm.
so I was kind of taken aback by that, but it was interesting to add to my genealogy.
Yeah, sure.
But,
You know, Knickerbocker is an interesting place anyway. That's named after the Knickerbocker Ranch near there, which was established by a man named Joseph Tweedy and his brother, who I can't remember what his brother's name was.
right.
They were New Yorkers
Yeah.
who came to Texas to become sheep ranchers and goat ranchers out in Knickerbocker, and were some of the first sheep and goat ranchers in the Concho Valley. They may not have been the first. There's a little bit of an argument about that, but they were certainly some of the first large-scale sheep and goat ranchers in the Concho Valley. Knickerbocker was, of course, named after a character from a Washington Irving story, I think.
Was it?
So that's where they got the name, and that was a Knickerbocker ranch that the Tweedy brothers and their partner established out at Knickerbocker. So yeah, I know exactly where you're talking about.
Well, that's interesting.
Yep.
San Angelo, the newspaper there is the Standard Times.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether you all have ever read any books by Elmer Kelton. Elmer was a wonderful author of many. There you go. Is that the book by Elmer?
The Wolf and the Buffalo?
Oh, I was going to recommend that book because
That's a good book.
It's an excellent story of Comanches and the Buffalo Soldiers. Buffalo Soldiers, I don't know whether you mentioned this, John, but the Buffalo Soldiers were black, and they were former slaves, actually, and had been recruited during the Civil War into making black, I think a couple 100,000, they had a couple 100,000 of black Negro troops. And then after the war, of course, the Army was, their whole job was for 30 years, the Indian Wars. And they were, well, and there was the infantry and the cavalry there was stationed there were Buffalo Soldiers. And of course, the term comes, there's a lot of reasons or ideas for why they were called Buffalo Soldiers, but the one I think that was most truthful or the real facts is the black hair is curly like the buffalo, the hair, the fur on the buffalo. And, but anyway, they were wonderful troops, those black troops. And the story of Renal McKenzie, you find McKenzie up near Lubbock, there's a McKenzie Grass Plains Park up there. And I guess that's named after Renal McKenzie because you find other
McKenzie Trail
places named after him. He had he was a hero from the Civil War and a colonel. I don't know. He probably was a general in the Civil War. I don't remember that. But a lot of those officers that had been promoted for their bravery or for their outstanding acts during the Civil War, they were like Custer was promoted to a major general at 29, I think, 27 or 28. But after the war, they had to return to their regular rank, which in the name of in Custer was a lieutenant colonel. So McKenzie was the commander at Fort Concho and defeated Quanah Parker and the Comanches in Paladero Canyon. That was a well-written story of that. You might want to Google and read the Wikipedia story of Renal McKenzie. You'll find a lengthy Wikipedia article on that. Unfortunately, he must have been bipolar or schizophrenic, because after you know, I guess as he grew older, he was still in active service, but he was committed to a mental institution and lived there and died there the rest of his life. So it was a sad ending for. Had you heard that, John, or read that?
I was thinking this morning as I was touching this presentation up a little bit, I was thinking somewhere down the line I read or heard that Mackenzie committed suicide towards the end of his life.
He could.
I'm gonna have to go look. I'm gonna have to look that up again because
Now that you mentioned it, he might.
That's in the back of my mind somewhere that he committed suicide towards the end of his life, and I'll have to go back and look that up again and confirm my suspicion. I remember hearing that somewhere, and I can't for the life of me remember where. But Herb did mention, and I always like talking to a San Angelo native. Herb did mention Emmer Kelton's book, The Wolf and the Buffalo. I don't know where y'all can see that. I had to run home at lunch and get my copy because somebody had the one in the library checked out. But excellent, excellent book. I may sit down and read it again this weekend. It's been a long time since I've read it, which talks about the conflict between the Buffalo Soldiers and the Comanche. Much of it is set at Fort Concho. Dr. Carlson's book is excellent as well, The Buffalo Soldier Tragedy of 1877.
Right.
And he talks in this book in the last chapter about a research trip he took with Emmer Kelton when Kelton was working on his book, The Wolf and the Buffalo. So that's in Dr. Carlson's excellent book, The Buffalo Soldier Tragedy of 1877. That's a story.
I've read several of Emmer Kelton's books, but I haven't read that.
I think Kelton wrote another book. I believe that title was The Good Old Boys.
Yeah, I've read
Good Old Boys is good too. Anything Emmer Kelton
Tommy Lee Jones
good.
and Sissy Spacek. It's a one, and it was a book that he wrote, and he wrote a sequel called The Smiling Country, and that was about where the leading character finally wound up out in Alpine, around Alpine. But
the sequel's not as good.
The one I really liked, and the movie I loved was The Good Old Boys, and that was about a family on the plains out between Midland and Rankin, where I was born, where I was actually graduated from high school, was from Rankin, and so that was really meaningful to me as a historical story, fiction story, but nonetheless, Elmer Kelton has written scores of books, and most are cowboy stories, many are. The Time It Never Rained, about the drought of 1950 to 1956, which I lived through out there in West Texas. That's a wonderful book about the hardships of how a rancher became, went from being relatively prosperous in his ranch to having to, fire all his workers and try to survive. So, yeah. Anyway.
From time to time, when I'm feeling particularly malicious, I have my Texas history students read The Time It Never Rained, and we do several things with that book. That novel is probably one of the great unsung American novels. If we still made good movies, which we don't, if we still made good movies, that would make an excellent movie. But the story of Charlie Flagg and the drought in the 1950s. When I was at Tech, almost 20 years ago now, it doesn't seem like that long. When I was at Tech in grad school, and we were trying to settle on a thesis topic, and I decided I wanted to do something on the sheep and goat industry. Dr. Carlson pointed me towards The Time It Never Rained and the drought in the 1950s, and it was out of that book and Dr. Carlson's book, Texas Woolly-Backs on the sheep and goat industry. That's where my thesis came from. Dr. Carlson was always going to get Emmer Kelton and me in the same room at the same time, but we always missed each other by 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh, really?
And of course, Kelton has passed away. The closest we came was at a meeting of the West Texas Historical Association in Alpine many years ago. And Elmer was going to be there, and we were going to meet, and some friends of mine took me to lunch in Alpine that day. I got food poisoning. Spent the rest of the conference in the hotel room and missed Aaron Kelton yet again because I felt like I was about to die. Don't eat lamb in Alpine. That was a terrible choice, but I think that's about as sick as I've ever been. But there were several other times we were supposed to meet up, and he'd either just missed me or I just missed him. And I've always kind of regretted that I didn't get to sit down and visit with Elmer Kelton. But certainly if you're in San Angelo, sometime go to the Cactus Bookstore. They have a lot of rare books in there, and they have all of Elmer Kelton's books in there. Good reading for you. But Nicholas Nolan.
Did he spend some time at Tech? I know he graduated from the university and is an honored alum, outstanding alum, which 6 are inducted every year for, you know, achievements and those kind of things. And I saw Elmer at, I got to shake his hand and visit with him a little bit at one of those inductions. And I asked him when the sequel to The Good Old Boys, the book Smiling Country might be made into a book, because I wanted I wanted that one to be made into a movie as well. I mean movie. And so, but he he says, you know, that's up to other people to do that, and you know, he'd support it, but he didn't undertake it. He died shortly, not long after that.
Gosh, 2004, I think.
Yeah.
I have to go look it up again.
It was back in those days when I was more active at the university than I am today.
Sure. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Charles, go ahead.
Fort Concho. If I was to go there, I've never been there. What would I find? Is there a visitor center?
There is, again.
Are there tours and things like that?
There is. And again, Fred and I picked the worst time in the world to go. They were closed. They have a very large visitor center there. Many of the structures and buildings have been restored. You can get tours through those. We happened to run into someone who worked there who happened to be there that day. And they did let us into some of the buildings and let us look around. But they have a lot of displays. They have a very large visitor center, very large parade grounds. It is right smack dab in the middle of San Angelo.
Okay, I've been through San Angelo. That's about all.
And they've restored all those officers' quarters on the right as you approach the entrance to it. I think I told all of you that my mother, when she was going to San Angelo Junior College, working on her degree, we lived in one of those. They were apartments at the time, the Concho apartments, and we lived upstairs in one of those officers' quarters, which were now been restored, and it's probably the most largest restored fort maybe in Texas.
You know, it probably is. Fort McCavitt may be a close second.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, Fort McCavitt may be a close second.
I was on a deer lease near Fort McCavitt.
Our plan the day we went down to Fort Concho, we were going to make it on down to Fort McCavitt as well, but we had spent so much time at Chadburn, and then we spent a pretty good while at Fort Concho too, and then we went to Miss Hattie's. We just didn't have time to make it on down to Fort McCavitt that day, and I wish we would have. But Fort McCavitt's been very well restored as well. But Charles, back to you. It's really worth going to. They've done a fine job with that. Excuse me. I'm going to go back down now that they've got the visitor center open and have them take me through on a tour. But Fred and I just picked the wrong time to go when we went, but we had to go to kind of put this thing together. And we took a lot of pictures, but I have the same problem I had last time. Zoom does not like my PowerPoints right now. It won't let me share screen right now for some reason, so y'all don't get to see the pictures that we took. I don't know what's going on with that. It's starting to annoy me. But I had the same problem with the PowerPoints that I had last time, and I got frustrated.
John, without Zoom,
it's probably me.
Fredericksburg might not ever get to see your presentation.
It's probably me, and being the Luddite that I am, I'm going to blame it on Zoom. Okay. But yeah, I don't know why it won't let me do the PowerPoints. I'm going to have to get with someone who knows more about Zoom than I do and try to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Any other questions? Any other comments? Any other concerns? Gosh, I've enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun for me. I hope it was a lot of fun for you.
Yes, I've enjoyed it.
I hope you learned a lot about Fort, we did them out of order, and that was my fault, but I hope you learned a lot about Fort Chadbourne and Fort Phantom and Fort Concho as well. They're all well worth going to see, especially Chadbourne and Concho. They're working on a visitor center at Fort Phantom slowly. We'll see where that ends up. But those forts are all well worth seeing. There are other forts not far from Abilene as well. Fort Griffin, up between Albany and Throckmorton, which is the very definition of the middle of nowhere. You got Fort Griffin State Park there. You have the side of the fort. You have the flat down below the fort. That's a fun one to go to as well. I haven't been out there in several years. I know they'll give you a guided tour of that facility as well. As we mentioned, Fort McCavitt is excellent to go to. I haven't been down there in a long time. I need to take a Saturday and roll down that way. If you're really adventurous, you can take off and go to Fort Davis sometime.
Yeah, I've been there. It's really
You know,
yeah.
going into the Big Bend country, that's not just somewhere you just go to. That's why we don't have the West Texas Historical Association meeting in Alpine anymore, because Alpine's hard to get to. You don't just exactly go to Alpine, especially the way I go. I go a long way. But those are some ports in the area. A colleague of mine and I were talking, I don't know, one day at lunch last week. I was talking about maybe doing another one of these. And he suggested maybe not looking at the forts around this area, but looking at the military camps from the same time. Camp Cooper and Camp Colorado, and there's 2 or 3 other ones that nobody knows anything about. That might be kind of an untapped thing to look at, and we'll think about that a little more maybe for the spring as I think about what I want to do then. But that was a pretty intriguing idea we had the other day about maybe not looking at forts, but looking at some of the military camps that were in this area. Probably most importantly was Camp Cooper and the whole Robert E. Lee connection to that little camp. But that may be something we look at in the spring. But I've greatly enjoyed this. I'm certainly going to do it again, Misha. I've really enjoyed this whole experience. I've enjoyed meeting y'all. I wish we could have done this in person because, again, I'm becoming anti-Zoom the longer we do this. But I think everybody is becoming anti-Zoom nowadays. But I've enjoyed it. I had fun, and I hope y'all learned something too. Anybody else have anything to add or say? Or
John, my email address is herbhurn, HERBHURN @yahoo.com.
Okay.
Just send me a note so that I have yours.
Okay.
The history department at UT, and I haven't looked at the website in a couple of years, I guess, but it's an incredible website and rendition of or description and explanation of all of these forts, and all on a website, and life and stories of what life was like in the days we're talking about. I'll try to find that and resend you the
Okay.
URL for it.
Okay. Herb, if you look down to the chat box thing, I just sent you my email address. So if you'll click on that chat thing down there, I've sent you my email. And I'll just tell everybody my email is John, 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 .Caraway, CARAWAY, at Cisco, CISCO.edu. John.Caraway at Cisco.edu. And I'll just send that out in the chat thing to everybody.
Well, let's see, John.Caraway at what?
John.Caraway at Cisco.edu. John.Caraway at Cisco.edu. So you have that anytime you want to get a hold of me, you have questions about something, please feel free to contact me. I'll be more than happy to help you with anything I can help you with. It's been my pleasure to meet all of y'all and do this. I was a little nervous about it when Fred Bailey came and kind of talked me into doing it. I need to sign up for one of Fred's lectures sometime so I can heckle him. But
Yeah.
it's kind of fun to heckle Fred.
Oh, he'd enjoy it.
Oh, Fred has fun. He did a thing down at Buffalo Gap 2 or 3 years ago. What was that on? I think that was on England and Rome or something. And I went down there for a couple of those and kind of gave him heck. But Fred's a good guy. I assume some of y'all have attended Fred's lectures. If you haven't, do. Fred's a hoot. He's my former boss, so I try to be nice to him anyway. But he's the one who kind of came to me and talked me into doing this, and I'm glad he did. I really, really enjoyed it.
Did you spend any time at Cisco Junior College?
I am at Cisco College in Abilene. This is my office on campus. I do it from up here because the lighting's better and the internet's a little better than it is at the house. The internet in Clyde is a little bit sketchy, so I thought I'd just come on campus. Of course, sometimes the internet on campus is a little bit sketchy, but we were lucked out, it held, and we never had any serious internet problems, which made me happy. The internet and I have a hate-hate relationship, so you know how.
Had a couple of graduates from Rankin in my year that played football at Cisco Junior College.
I have a colleague around the corner here. His father passed away last year before last, and he played football at Rankin back in probably the 40s or 50s. And he has a picture. He has a picture of his father's football team at Rankin in his office around the corner here. So there's a Rankin connection for you. No reason on earth to talk about Rankin, Texas, but there's a connection. Misha, that's all I've got. I've enjoyed it.
Well, we thank you so much for doing this, and
You
we
bet.
look forward to what you have for us in the spring.
Yep.
If anybody has any ideas of a class you'd like to see us
Give
do,
me some ideas. Yeah.
yes.
I've
Shoot
got a
us
couple of ideas.
Shoot John. Yeah.
That are floating around in my head. I'm going to kind of flesh them out, maybe over Thanksgiving and Christmas break, and kind of see which one I want to go. I've got a couple of ideas floating around in my head for the spring, so we'll get together in spring and do this again.
Yes, definitely.
You bet.
Again, if anybody has any problems registering for classes, get a hold of one of us. We would be more than happy to help you with registering. We can even do payments over the phone. And with that, I will say thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting OLLI.
You bet.
And we will see you next time.
You bet.
Be
We'll
sure
do it again.
be sure to check in on our next class at 4 o'clock today is the Travels of Rudyard Kipling. So yes, I hope to see you guys there.
Jungle Book. Yeah.
Yes.
That's all I've got on Kipling. Sorry. Yeah. All right. Y'all have a good day. It was good
Have
to
a
meet
wonderful
y'all.
day.
Y'all take
Thank
care.
you.
Enjoyed it, John. Appreciate
You
it.
bet.